It's kind of interesting how we acquire some of these objects. For example, this display started out with my finding a piece of sheet music about a Montana soldier, just a soldier. That Army Air Corps, they were still considered soldiers instead of airmen. And it was written by a sister of a man that was a waist gunner on a B17. And so I bought the sheet music from an antique dealer for a couple bucks. And I thought, well, I wonder if the family's still alive. So I did a phone directory search, and there was a number over in Moult, Montana. That's over beyond Vaughan or over in the Bozeman area. And I called for a couple months and kept getting just a ringing. Finally, I asked the operator to check on it, and she said, well, there's a second number in Vaughan, the same name. So I called that. It was the widow of Virgil Zimmerman. And I told her what we were doing and wondered if she had any of his personal effects. He had made it home after the war, but he died after that. And she says, well, I have his bomber jacket, his uniform, and some other things, his diary. And she says, but I don't know what the children want to do about it. I says, well, before you make a decision, final decision, would you mind checking us out? Well, 2 weeks later, she came over with a friend, drove about 350 miles to check us out. And she came through the museum, saw what we were doing, and says, yeah, this would be a good place. She says, next time you're over there, and the following year we were going through there for a museum convention, she gave me these things. And at that time, that jacket fit me, and it was such a neat thing to get because these are very, very hard to find, very valuable. And I wore it the whole museum convention, this 3-day convention. Now, she came back on a subsequent visit and gave me his diary. He was keeping records over his flights and his bombing runs and so forth. Fortunately, they were not shot down. However, not so fortunate for the next veteran that we honor here. We see a picture of Lieutenant Wilson right here. That's underneath a tail gun sight for a 50 caliber twin 50s on a B17, by the way, of which he flew. And he was shot down and killed, and awarded the Purple Heart, you see, and the Air Medal posthumously. It was given to the next of kin, usually the mother. His niece wondered if I wanted these things, the medals and the history, and I said, you bet. And so later on, a few months later, I get a call from her husband and said, well, we got his footlocker, would you like that? And I said, well, yeah, I can, nothing else, I can use it to store manuals and things in so the mice don't get to them and so. So he dropped it off, and I just put it in storage until I needed it. One day I needed it, and I started dusting it off, and I noticed this tag on the very end of the trunk, effects tag. This family sent a young man off to war to fight for freedom. All they got back was some personal effects in a trunk. In other words, the things that were probably in his barracks at home in the base and so forth. So that trunk had a whole new meaning. It wasn't a trunk anymore. It was a symbol of the price of freedom. Now on that end of that footlocker, we see some flak or shrapnel, actually it was called. It's called flak. When the anti-aircraft guns from the enemy are exploding the shells up in the vicinity of the airplanes, very deadly, and it would destroy. It'd go through a helmet easily, and brought a lot of airplanes down. Probably more airplanes brought down by flak than fighter airplanes. And we go on over here to another interesting section. This is a picture of a B-17 up here. This is an earlier model, didn't have a chin turret on it. That made an emergency landing at Polson Airport in 1943 in February. They were on a training mission. They got above the clouds, and the radio went out. They didn't know where they were. They couldn't navigate in any way, and they didn't want to just drop down through the clouds. You might drop into a mountaintop. And so they kept circling around. Eventually got over here to western Montana, over Flathead Lake, and there was an opening in the cloud, and they saw the lake. This was getting late at night, and they thought it was a field. It was a flat surface, they could realize, and so they jettisoned their bombs. This is actually the only piece left of their practice bombs. They weren't full of high explosive, basically full of sand or water and a small powder charge, black powder charge, so they could tell in training where they hit. But anyhow, he was a bombardier. They made their emergency landing. They got out, and he literally kissed the ground, the snowy ground. The telephone operator had heard the airplane circling and heard on the news of this lost airplane. She notified the sheriff, and they went out to the runway here at Polson, small airport. They lit up the runway with their headlights, made the emergency landing safely. He put the Norden bomb sight, which was a top secret device that allowed high altitude pinpoint bombing. And the enemy wanted to get a hold of that and copy it. They kept it in the bank safe in the town of Polson here. And then we got, later on, as we built this display, I've got showing up here a couple of restaurant receipts. A man from Polson area, he was a young man, got the autographs of all the crew, and it's listed on there. And we see a picture of the crew. They were later split up, went to different airplanes. Herb was a bombardier, and he kept record of the fuse on these little fuse tags. There's a little, like a cotter pin on the end, and they pull that out when they're ready to arm the bombs. And then as the bomb would go through the air, the little propeller would go down and hit the fuse at whatever elevation they wanted. Sometimes they wanted to explode above ground, sometimes when it hit. And he kept a record of those up to 15th mission. He was shot down on his 15th mission and spent his time in the German prison camp the rest of the time. And there's his German prison tag over here. And he later returned to Polson and reacquainted himself with some of the people that had befriended him when they landed here. So it makes a personal interest story. And out in our bomber barracks, there's more about the B17, one of the most famous bombers. They called the Flying Fortress. And my mom and dad both worked on that during the war. So it's something a little more special to me because of that. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe to the Miracle of America Museum.